March 15th, 1985. Jack Sullivan had survived 3 tours in Vietnam and 2 decades of Hollywood stunts. The 2 Thai guides who led him into the jungle that morning seemed harmless enough. That's exactly why they caught him completely off guard. The rope cut into his wrists as they bound him to the banyan tree. No demands for money yet, no threats, just questions about Firebase Charlie and a village called Ban Nong that Jack hadn't heard mentioned in 20 years. March 15th, 1985. Jack Sullivan had survived 3 tours in Vietnam and 2 decades of Hollywood stunts. The 2 Thai guides who led him into the jungle that morning seemed harmless enough. That's exactly why they caught him completely off guard. The rope cut into his wrists as they bound him to the banyan tree. No demands for money yet, no threats. Just questions about Firebase Charlie and a village called Ban Nong that Jack hadn't heard mentioned in 20 years. What happened in the next 6 hours became the most classified incident in Southeast Asia since the war ended. The Pentagon held emergency meetings because of it. And for 40 years, when military brass talked about acceptable losses, they always came back to this jungle. The day 2 farmers with rope and old photographs cornered a man who thought he'd buried his sins deep enough. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rope bit into Marcus's wrists as sweat carved trails through the dust on his weathered face. The older brother, maybe 30, with calloused hands that spoke of hard labor, checked the knots with practiced efficiency. His younger companion, barely out of his teens, kept glancing nervously toward the film set they'd left behind 2 hours ago. "Cayman," the younger one whispered in Thai, then switched to broken English. "Police come soon. We should—" "No police," Cayman cut him off, his English clearer, more deliberate. He stepped closer to Marcus, those familiar dark eyes studying every line on the action star's face. "Not yet." Marcus tested the ropes binding him to the massive teak tree. Professional work. These weren't desperate amateurs grabbing the first American they could find. The kidnapping had been surgical. 2 prop guns appearing in their hands during the lunch break. The entire crew frozen as they'd marched him into the jungle at gunpoint. No shots fired, no one hurt. "You know who I am," Marcus said. It wasn't a question. Cayman's jaw tightened. Marcus Mackenzie, Hollywood hero. The last word dripped with venom. Man who makes movies about courage while real men die for his mistakes. The younger brother, Somkai, Marcus had heard him called, fidgeted with a length of rope. "Cayman, maybe we should just take money and go. Father never got chance to want anything." Cayman's voice cracked like a whip. He died screaming on soundstage floor while this man counted his profits. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Marcus closed his eyes, seeing again that terrible day 15 years ago. The explosion that wasn't supposed to happen. The rigging that failed catastrophically. 3 good men, a stuntman, a rigger, and a pyrotechnician, dead because he'd pushed the budget, cut corners, ignored safety protocols. "Porn Siraporn," Marcus whispered. "Your father was Porn Siraporn." Cayman's hand moved to the knife at his belt. "You remember." "I remember all of them." Marcus opened his eyes, meeting that burning stare. "Porn, Miguel Santos, Jimmy Kellerman. I remember their wives' faces at the funerals. Their children's tears." "You came to father's funeral," Somkai said suddenly. "Cayman saw you. In back, wearing dark glasses." "I went to all 3. Marcus's voice was barely audible over the jungle's symphony of insects and distant birds. "It was my fault they died." "Yes," Kamon said simply. "It was." The admission hung between them like smoke. Marcus had never said those words aloud, not to the investigators, not to the lawyers, not even to his ex-wife Sarah during their final, devastating fight. The official report blamed equipment failure. The insurance company paid out. The families got settlements that could never replace what they'd lost. But Marcus knew the truth. He'd pushed too hard, moved too fast, ignored warning signs because the studio was breathing down his neck about budget overruns. $50,000, Kamon continued, crouching down until he was eye level with his prisoner. "Not much for Hollywood star, but enough to save our village." "Your village?" Somkai glanced at his brother nervously. Come on. He deserves to know why he dies today. Cayman's fingers traced the handle of his knife. Development company wants our land. Builds resort for rich tourists. They give us 3 months to leave. No compensation. No new home. His smile was sharp as broken glass. Same company that owns studio where father died. Marcus felt the world tilt. What did you say? Phoenix Holdings. They buy studio in 1985. We research, we learn. Very interesting what we find about that day. Cayman stood slowly. Equipment that failed? It was sabotaged. The jungle seemed to hold its breath. Marcus stared at the two brothers, his mind racing. Phoenix Holdings, he knew that name. They'd been trying to buy him out of his production company for years, ever since his comeback started gaining momentum. That's impossible, Marcus said, but even as the words left his mouth, memories surfaced. The rigger who disappeared after the accident. The pyrotechnician's strange behavior in the days leading up to the shoot. The equipment failure that had been just a little too convenient, a little too thorough. Father wasn't supposed to die, Cayman continued. You were. Marcus Mackenzie, stubborn producer who wouldn't sell his company. But father got there first when explosion happened. Tried to save other men. Somkai was crying now, silent tears streaming down his young face. Father died hero, but wrong man lived. Marcus felt 15 years of guilt transform into something else entirely. A cold, burning rage that had nothing to do with self-pity and everything to do with justice denied. 3 innocent men had died in his place. Their families had suffered, while he'd carried survivors' guilt like a badge of honor. If what these brothers claimed was true, then everyone, Marcus included, had been played. Prove it, Marcus said quietly. Cayman smiled, and for the first time it reached his eyes. Oh, Mr. Mackenzie, we plan to do much more than that. He pulled a manila envelope from his backpack and tossed it into Marcus's lap. First, you see truth. Then you help us get justice. Or you die like father should have lived, fighting for what's right. Marcus stared at the unfinished letter, the careful Thai script mixing with broken English in his dead friend's handwriting. The paper trembled. Whether from the humid jungle air or his own shaking hands, he couldn't tell. Read it, Cayman urged, crouching beside him. All of it. Marcus's eyes moved across Porn's meticulous words. Mr. Mackenzie, I think someone is trying to hurt you. The new man, Chen, he asks too many questions about your schedule, where you stand during shots. Yesterday I catch him near rigging after hours. He says checking safety, but tools in his hands are wrong tools. I take pictures, but he sees me. Says he report me for interfering. I know you busy with studio pressure, but something not right. Miguel feels it too. We talk, we watch. Tomorrow is big stunt sequence. Maybe we should... The letter ended there, the pen trailing off mid-sentence. Porn Siraporn had died the next day, crushed beneath falling scaffolding while trying to pull Miguel Santos clear of the blast zone. He never got to warn you, Somkai whispered. Cayman and we found this in his things after funeral. Took years to understand what it meant. Marcus felt his world reshaping itself with each revelation. 15 years of self-flagellation, of believing he'd caused 3 deaths through his own negligence and greed. But if this was true, if Phoenix Holdings had orchestrated the sabotage, then those men had died because someone wanted Marcus Mackenzie dead, and they'd simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. The equipment failure, Marcus said slowly, pieces falling into place. The blast happened during the rigging sequence because Chen knew I'd be standing right underneath it. That was my usual spot for overseeing complex stunts. Cayman nodded grimly. But father saw you arguing with director 20 feet away. He knew explosion was coming, not when, but soon. So he stayed close to rigging, trying to protect other men until he could prove what Chen was doing. The helicopter was getting closer now, its rotors beating a steady rhythm through the jungle canopy. Search and rescue, probably with Thai military support. But Marcus found himself in no hurry to be found. The life he'd be returning to, the careful isolation, the guilt-driven existence, suddenly felt like a prison he'd built from lies. There's more, Cayman continued, pulling out another document. This one was newer, crisp white paper with yesterday's date. Phoenix Holdings made new offer to our village chief 3 days ago. Very generous suddenly, but with conditions. Marcus scanned the contract, his blood chilling with each clause. Phoenix Holdings was offering the village triple the land's assessed value, but only if they signed within the week, and only if they agreed to never speak about certain historical matters related to the company's previous entertainment industry holdings. They know you're here filming, Marcus realized. They're afraid. Afraid you might learn truth, Sumkai agreed. Afraid villagers might talk to famous American actor about old stories, so they try to buy silence. Marcus laughed bitterly. 15 years too late for that. If they just left everyone alone. He trailed off, seeing the cruel irony. Phoenix Holdings' attempt to cover up their old crime had led directly to this moment. 2 sons confronting the man they'd thought was their father's killer, only to discover they were all victims of the same conspiracy. The $50,000 you want for ransom, Marcus said. That's not really about the money, is it? You're trying to force Phoenix Holdings to negotiate. Make them think you're just desperate criminals instead of people who know their secrets. Cayman's smile was sharp. Smart man. We demand money from Marcus Mackenzie. Phoenix Holdings pays to keep everything quiet. They think they buy our silence forever. But you don't want their money. You want justice. We want them destroyed, Coman said simply. Same way they destroyed our father, our family, our village. The helicopter sound was almost overhead now. Marcus could hear voices in the distance, search teams spreading out through the jungle. Soon this moment would be over. He'd be rescued, the brothers would disappear deeper into the wilderness, and Phoenix Holdings would continue their systematic destruction of anyone who threatened their secrets, unless he chose differently. Cut me loose, Marcus said quietly. Both brothers stared at him. What? Sumkai asked. Cut the ropes. Let me go. But not back to the search teams. Marcus met Cayman's eyes, seeing his own determination reflected there. I want to help you take these bastards down. Cayman studied his face for a long moment. The helicopter was circling now, its rotors creating wind patterns that rustled the jungle canopy above them. Soon the search would narrow to this area. You could be lying, Cayman said finally. Famous actor, making promises to save his own life. Marcus thought of Porn's unfinished letter, of 3 good men dying in his place, of a village about to be destroyed by the same corporation that had orchestrated it all. Maybe, he admitted, but your father tried to save my life once. Let me return the favor. Cayman's knife hesitated inches from the ropes binding Marcus's wrists. The helicopter's roar was deafening now, close enough to send debris spiraling down through the canopy. Somchai grabbed his brother's arm, speaking rapid Thai that Marcus couldn't follow but understood perfectly. This is crazy, we should run, we're going to get caught. How do we know you won't signal them the moment you're free? Common shouted over the noise, his blade still hovering uncertainly. Marcus felt sweat stinging his eyes, his heart hammering against his ribs. Every instinct screamed at him to stay safe, to let the rescue happen, to return to his controlled life of measured guilt and careful isolation. The smart play was obvious. Get rescued. Let the authorities handle the brothers. Pretend none of this had happened. But Porn's unfinished letter burned in his memory like acid. Because I'm already dead, Marcus said, the words surprising him with their truth. I've been dead for 15 years, just going through the motions. At least this way, maybe those 3 men's deaths will mean something. The helicopter passed directly overhead, its downwash turning the jungle into a windstorm of leaves and branches. Cayman's eyes searched Marcus's face, looking for the lie, the desperate deception of a man who'd say anything to live. Instead, he saw something that made him lower the knife completely. Marcus recognized that look, the hollow stare of someone who'd been carrying unbearable weight for too long. It was the same expression he'd seen in mirrors for 15 years. You're afraid, Marcus said suddenly, understanding flooding through him. Not of getting caught. You're afraid of what happens if we actually succeed. Because then you'll have to figure out how to live without the anger. Somchai stopped arguing, his wide eyes moving between his brother and their captive. The helicopter was moving away now, following some other lead, but the sound of distant voices was growing stronger. Search teams on foot, spreading out in a grid pattern, professional, methodical, closing in. Cayman's hand trembled almost imperceptibly. Father was everything to us after Mother got sick. When he died, he swallowed hard. Village elders, they wanted to sue, but American lawyers too expensive. Studio lawyers said equipment failure, act of God. Phoenix Holdings, they were just name on papers, untouchable. So you've been planning this for 15 years, Marcus said. Following Phoenix Holdings, tracking their business, waiting for the right moment. Not 15 years, Somkai said quietly. 5. Took 10 years just to understand what Father's papers meant, to learn English well enough to read contracts, to trace connection between Phoenix Holdings and the studio. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the jungle shade. 5 years of careful planning. These weren't desperate criminals acting on impulse, they were hunters who'd been stalking their prey with infinite patience. There will be others, he said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. Other people Phoenix Holdings has destroyed, other families with evidence hidden away. Kamen nodded grimly. Construction worker in Bangkok who fell from building when he tried to organize safety union. Journalist in Phuket who disappeared after investigating resort development corruption. Always accidents, always convenient for Phoenix Holdings. The voices were getting closer now. Marcus could make out individual words in English and Thai. Spread out, check the ravine, no sign yet. Soon they'd be found, and this moment of possibility would collapse into chaos. Kamen and Somkai would vanish into the jungle, taking their evidence with them. Phoenix Holdings would breathe easier. The cycle would continue. But there was something else in Kamon's expression now, a flicker of desperate hope that he was trying hard to suppress. The look of someone who'd been carrying a burden alone for so long that the possibility of help seemed almost impossible to believe. "Cut me loose," Marcus said again, more urgently. "Not because you trust me, but because staying angry is killing you the same way guilt was killing me." Kamon's knife moved to the ropes, then stopped again. "If you betray us, then you'll kill me, and Phoenix Holdings will have finally gotten what they wanted 15 years ago." Marcus managed a bitter smile. "But if I don't betray you, maybe we can give your father the justice he died trying to secure." Somchai was crying again, silent tears cutting tracks through the dirt on his young face. "Kamon, please. I'm tired of being angry all the time. I want to go home." The helicopter was circling back, its pilot probably reporting negative contact to ground teams. In minutes, the search would tighten around their position. The window was closing. Kamen looked at his brother, then at Marcus, then at the scattered evidence of Phoenix Holdings' crimes. His jaw worked silently, years of rage warring with something else, the terrifying possibility of hope. The knife bit through rope fibers with a sound like tearing silk. Marcus's hands came free with a rush of pins and needles, blood flowing back into fingers that had been numb for hours. He flexed his wrists, wincing at the raw welts left by the rope, then reached for Kamon's evidence folder with hands that shook worse than he wanted to admit. The brothers watched him with the tense alertness of prey animals, ready to bolt at the first sign of betrayal. Marcus understood. He'd just become the most dangerous variable in their carefully planned equation. "There's something you need to know," Marcus said, spreading Porn's photographs across the jungle floor, "about what happened after your father died." He pulled out his wallet, fingers finding a newspaper clipping he'd carried for 15 years, yellowed, creased from countless readings, the edges soft as tissue paper. The headline read, "Stunt Coordinator's Widow Dies in Car Accident." Kamon went rigid. "What is this?" "Your mother," Marcus said quietly. The official report said mechanical failure. Brake lines, they claimed. But look at the date. Somchai leaned over his brother's shoulder, both of them staring at the clipping. The accident had occurred exactly 1 week after the studio's final settlement payment, the same week Phoenix Holdings had quietly purchased the film production company that owned rights to the footage of the rigging failure. "She was going to talk," Kamen whispered, understanding dawning in his eyes like horror. The settlement money, it wasn't enough. She was going to hire real lawyers. Marcus nodded, the weight of 15 years' silence crushing down on him. "I tried to visit her in the hospital before she died. Wanted to apologize, to explain. But Phoenix Holdings people were already there. Lawyers, they said. Handling the estate matters." The jungle around them had gone eerily quiet, as if the search teams had temporarily moved on. But Marcus knew they'd be back. Professionals didn't give up this easily. Why didn't you tell anyone? Somkai's voice was barely audible. You suspected, but you said nothing? Because I was a coward. The admission tasted like poison. Because my career was already finished, my marriage was over, and I told myself there was no proof. Because it was easier to blame myself than to fight people who could make problems disappear. Cayman was staring at the clipping as if it might spontaneously combust. All these years we thought, his voice cracked. We blamed you for everything. Father's death, mother's accident, losing our home when insurance money ran out. You were right to blame me, Marcus said. Maybe I didn't sabotage the rigging, but I failed your family when they needed justice. I chose my own pain over their truth. The sound of breaking branches echoed from somewhere to their left. Search teams moving in a sweep pattern, probably 50 yards out but closing steadily. Marcus gathered the evidence with practiced efficiency, muscle memory from decades of quick-set changes and emergency relocations. There's more you need to see, he said, pulling out his phone. The satellite connection was weak but functional. I've been tracking Phoenix Holdings for years. Not actively, I'm not that brave, but watching their stock reports, their development projects, waiting for them to finally collapse under their own corruption. He scrolled through saved articles, showing the brothers a pattern that had taken him years to recognize. Phoenix Holdings' expansion had accelerated dramatically in the last 5 years, their portfolio growing through a series of coincidental acquisitions, small companies that had refused buyout offers, then suffered mysterious setbacks, equipment failures, key personnel accidents, regulatory problems that appeared overnight. They're not just covering up old crimes anymore, Marcus realized, the scope of it hitting him like vertigo. They've turned it into a business model, create the problems, then swoop in to buy the distressed assets. Somkai pointed to one of the articles, a resort development in Krabi, where local fishing families had been forced out after their boats started mysteriously sinking in calm weather. This is our village in 2 years if we take their money and stay quiet. Cayman's expression had hardened into something Marcus recognized, the cold focus of a stuntman calculating risks before a dangerous sequence. Then we don't stay quiet. They'll kill you, Marcus said bluntly, both of you. Make it look like an accident, just like your parents. Maybe. Kaman folded the evidence back into its weatherproof envelope. But we have something they didn't. What's that? Marcus Mackenzie. Somchai managed a grim smile. Famous American action star who's very publicly filming in this jungle. If something happens to the locals who kidnapped him, people will ask questions. The voices were getting closer again. Marcus could hear his own name being called through the trees. Soon they'd have to choose. Surrender to the search teams and let Phoenix Holdings' influence bury everything, or disappear deeper into the jungle with evidence that could destroy a corporation built on decades of calculated murder. Marcus looked at Porn's unfinished letter one more time, then tucked it carefully into his shirt pocket. For 15 years he'd been dying slowly of guilt and isolation. Maybe it was time to try living dangerously instead. Which way? He asked. Kaman pointed toward a barely visible trail that wound deeper into the canopy, where the undergrowth grew so thick it would swallow them completely. But before Marcus could take a step, Somkai grabbed his arm with surprising strength. Wait, the younger brother said, his voice tight with sudden realization. How did they know? Know what? Marcus asked, though ice was already forming in his stomach. Phoenix Holdings made their new offer to our village chief 3 days ago, Somchai continued, his eyes wide with dawning horror. But your film crew only announced the Thailand location 2 weeks ago. How did Phoenix Holdings know to panic and buy silence before anyone even knew you were coming here? The jungle seemed to close in around them as the implications hit. Marcus felt 15 years of carefully constructed assumptions crumbling like rotten scaffolding. Someone told them, he said slowly. Someone who knew about the location before it was public. Cayman was already pulling out his phone, fingers flying across the cracked screen. The film production company for your new movie, he said. Who owns it? Marcus's mouth went dry. Meridian Pictures. It's a subsidiary of... He stopped, the words dying in his throat as memory crashed over him like a physical blow. Of what? Somkai demanded. Phoenix Holdings. The admission came out as a whisper. Jesus Christ, Phoenix Holdings bought Meridian Pictures 6 months ago. The brothers stared at him in stunned silence. Through the trees, voices were calling Marcus's name with increasing urgency, but they sounded hollow now, like echoes from another world. Your comeback movie, Kamon said, understanding flooding his features. They're producing your comeback movie. Marcus sank against a tree trunk, his legs suddenly unreliable. The accident that had destroyed his career, the years of exile and guilt, the carefully orchestrated return to filmmaking in the exact location where Porn's sons lived, none of it had been coincidence. They've been controlling my life for 15 years, he said, the words tasting like ash. Every failed project, every door that closed in my face, every time I tried to work again and mysteriously couldn't get financing. He laughed bitterly. I thought I was being punished by karma, but they were managing my career, keeping me just desperate enough. Desperate enough for what? Samkai asked. For this. Marcus gestured at the jungle around them, at the elaborate trap that was only now revealing its true dimensions. They needed me here, in this specific place, at this specific time, but they needed it to look natural, like my own choice. The search helicopters were circling back, their sound growing louder, but Marcus barely heard them anymore. His mind was racing through 15 years of carefully orchestrated failures, seeing them all in horrifying new context. The comeback script, he continued, pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. It wasn't written for me. It was written about me. An aging action star trying to redeem himself after a tragic set accident that killed 3 people. They didn't just ruin my career, they turned my life into content. Kamon's face had gone pale. But why? Why bring you here now? Because you two were getting too close. Marcus pulled out Phoenix Holdings' latest contract offer, the one with the suspiciously generous terms. They needed a reason to pay the village to stay quiet, something that looked legitimate. What better cover than protecting a famous American actor from kidnappers? The horrible elegance of it was breathtaking. Phoenix Holdings had orchestrated his return to filmmaking, chosen Thailand as the location, and probably even fed information about his schedule to the brothers. They'd counted on 15 years of suppressed rage to create exactly this scenario. A kidnapping that would justify any amount of money changing hands to ensure the safety of all parties involved. They wanted you to take me, Marcus said, staring at Kamon with growing horror. The whole thing was designed to give them an excuse to buy your silence under the pretense of resolving a hostage situation. Samkai was shaking his head frantically. No, that's impossible. We planned this ourselves. We tracked your schedule. We chose the moment. Did you? Marcus interrupted. Or did the information just happen to be available? Security schedules that were easier to obtain than they should have been, crew rotations that left convenient gaps, local contacts who knew exactly when I'd be alone? The brothers exchanged a look of dawning terror. Through the jungle canopy, Marcus could see the helicopter circling lower, its pilot probably coordinating with ground teams for a final sweep. Then Kamon's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The display showed a local number, but when he answered, the voice that emerged was crisp, American, and coldly amused. Hello, Mr. Thanakit, the voice said, easily audible in the jungle quiet. I believe you have something that belongs to us. The casual arrogance in those words, the assumption that Marcus Mackenzie was property to be recovered rather than a human being to be rescued, exposed everything. Phoenix Holdings wasn't just covering up old crimes anymore. They were producing new ones, complete with scripts, locations, and carefully managed outcomes. Marcus looked at the brothers, seeing his own sick realization reflected in their faces. They hadn't just been played, they'd been cast. The voice on Kamon's phone continued with the practiced smoothness of a man accustomed to buying silence. Now I know this situation has gotten a bit out of hand, but we're prepared to offer a very generous settlement, enough to relocate your entire village to better land with full compensation for any inconvenience. Marcus watched the brothers' faces cycle through disbelief, rage, and something approaching despair. 15 years of careful planning, reduced to a scripted performance for Phoenix Holdings' benefit. You orchestrated everything, Kamon said into the phone, his voice barely controlled. Our father's death, Our mother's accident. Ancient history, the voice interrupted dismissively. We're talking about your future now. And Mr. Mackenzie's safe return, of course. I'm sure he's eager to get back to his important work. Marcus stepped closer to the phone. The voice belonged to someone who'd never had to carry the weight of the lives he'd destroyed. Smooth, confident, untouchable. But there was something else underneath the arrogance, impatience, maybe even desperation. They need us to play along, Marcus whispered to the brothers. This whole scenario only works if we follow their script. Somkai's eyes were bright with unshed tears of rage. What script? Grateful kidnapping victims accept generous compensation for their trauma, Marcus said, pieces clicking together with horrible clarity. No questions asked, no investigations launched. Phoenix Holdings looks like heroes resolving a crisis they secretly created. The voice was still talking, laying out terms with the casual precision of someone reading from prepared notes. Relocation packages, development rights, confidentiality agreements that would seal their silence forever. But here's what they didn't count on, Marcus continued, his voice gaining strength. I'm not the same broken man they've been manipulating for 15 years. Cayman looked at him sharply. What do you mean? Marcus pulled out his father's old military compass, the one thing he'd carried through every film, every stunt, every moment when he'd needed to find true north. His hands had stopped shaking. I mean, I've been documenting Phoenix Holdings for years without realizing it, he said. Every suspicious accident, every convenient bankruptcy, every time they swooped in to buy distressed assets, I kept telling myself I was just being paranoid, but I was actually building a case file. He scrolled through his phone's photo gallery, showing them images he'd captured almost compulsively over the past 5 years. Construction sites where safety violations had killed workers, environmental disasters that had forced land sales, newspaper articles about mysterious deaths of activists and journalists. Jesus, Somkai breathed. There are dozens of them. More than that, Marcus said. And I know people, stunt coordinators, safety inspectors, insurance investigators who've been keeping quiet because they thought they were alone. People who've been afraid to speak up because Phoenix Holdings seemed too powerful to fight. The voice on the phone had stopped talking, waiting for a response. In the silence, Marcus could hear his own heartbeat, steady and strong for the first time in years. They made one crucial mistake, he said, taking the phone from Kaman's unresisting hand. They assumed I'd stay broken. Who is this? The voice demanded, suddenly sharp with concern. This is Marcus Mackenzie, he said into the phone, and I'm not your property anymore. The silence that followed stretched long enough for the helicopter to make another pass overhead. When the voice returned, all pretense of cordiality had vanished. You have no idea what you're playing with, Mackenzie. We've been protecting you for 15 years. Without our guidance, you'd have drunk yourself to death in some Hollywood gutter. Maybe, Marcus admitted. But I'd rather die as myself than live as your puppet. He ended the call and looked at the brothers. Kaman was staring at him with something approaching awe, while Somkai clutched his father's evidence folder like a lifeline. So what now? Kaman asked. They'll never let us just walk away. Marcus smiled, feeling muscles in his face that hadn't moved in years. Then we don't walk away. We go hunting. The sound of approaching footsteps crashed through the undergrowth. The search teams had finally triangulated their position. But instead of panic, Marcus felt something he'd almost forgotten. The cold clarity that came before a dangerous stunt, when preparation met opportunity and fear transformed into focus. Can you get us out of here without being seen? He asked Kaman. Yes, but when we disappear, Marcus said, shouldering the evidence pack with practiced efficiency. All 3 of us completely off the grid. Phoenix Holdings wants to play director with our lives? Time to show them what happens when the actors go off script. The first searcher's voice echoed through the trees, close enough to make out individual words. But Marcus was already moving, following Kaman deeper into the green maze where Phoenix Holdings' carefully constructed narrative would finally, irreversibly, collapse. The ancient temple ruins materialized from the jungle mist like a fever dream, crumbling stone guardians draped in vines, their faces worn smooth by centuries of monsoons. Cayman had led them here through paths so narrow they'd had to move single file. But now they emerged into a circular clearing where broken columns reached toward the canopy like accusatory fingers. "Safe house?" Marcus asked, breathing hard. "Better." Kaman pointed to a satellite phone mounted on a weatherproof case beside the temple's main altar. "Communication hub. My father helped install it before he died. Backup system for emergency rescue operations." Somkai was already working with practiced efficiency, connecting cables with hands that shook only slightly. "We can reach anyone from here. News stations, police, international press." Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Not hope exactly, but the possibility of it. For 15 years he'd carried Porn's death like a stone in his throat. Now, standing in this temple where desperate people came to fight for truth, that weight was transforming into something else entirely. The satellite connection crackled to life just as voices erupted from the jungle around them. Phoenix Holdings search teams had found their trail. "How long do we have?" Marcus asked. "Minutes," Kamen replied, but his voice was steady. "Long enough." Marcus pulled up the contact for Sarah Chen, the investigative journalist who'd been trying to interview him for months about industry safety violations. His finger hesitated over the call button for one heartbeat. This was the point of no return, the moment when Marcus Mackenzie would stop being Phoenix Holdings' carefully managed asset and become their most dangerous enemy. He pressed call. "Sarah? It's Marcus Mackenzie. I'm sending you something that's going to change everything." While he spoke, Somkai was uploading their evidence to every cloud server he could access. The original footage of the rigging failure, Porn's unfinished letter, the pattern of Phoenix Holdings acquisitions. 15 years of buried truth flowing into the digital bloodstream where it could never be completely destroyed. "Marcus, where are you?" Sarah's voice was sharp with professional excitement. "There are reports you've been kidnapped." "I'm with the kidnappers," he said, watching Kamon's face break into something approaching a smile. "And they're the most honest men I've met in 15 years. The sound of approaching boots was getting closer. Through gaps in the temple walls, Marcus could see tactical gear moving between the trees, professional soldiers, not local police. Phoenix Holdings wasn't taking chances anymore. "Listen carefully," Marcus continued into the phone. "Everything I'm sending you has been verified. Phoenix Holdings has been manufacturing accidents for decades, killing anyone who threatened their expansion. The explosion that ended my career was meant for me, but 3 innocent men died instead." Somshai held up 5 fingers, then 4, counting down the seconds until the upload completed. The temple ruins seemed to vibrate with approaching footsteps. "Sarah, when this story breaks, Phoenix Holdings will try to discredit everything. They'll say I'm having a breakdown, that I'm being manipulated by criminals." Marcus looked at the brothers, seeing Porn's features reflected in both their faces. "But I need you to understand something. The men with me aren't criminals. They're sons trying to get justice for their father. 3 fingers. 2. The first Phoenix Holdings operative appeared in the temple entrance. Military bearing, professional equipment, the kind of man who solved problems with controlled violence. But he stopped when he saw Marcus speaking calmly into the satellite phone, as if some part of him understood that the situation had already moved beyond the reach of bullets. "The upload is complete," Somkai said quietly. Marcus smiled at the operative, feeling a strange lightness in his chest. "Too late," he said, not sure if he was speaking to the phone or to the armed men now filling the temple entrance. The lead operative raised his weapon, but his radio crackled to life before he could give orders. A voice Marcus recognized, the smooth executive from the phone call, was speaking in rapid, urgent tones. Stand down, do not engage. Repeat, do not engage." The operative's face showed confusion, then understanding, then something approaching respect. He lowered his weapon and stepped back. "They can't touch us now," Kamen said wonderingly. "The whole world is watching." Marcus ended the call with Sarah and looked around the ancient temple. Broken stones and weathered carvings surrounded them like witnesses to countless other moments when truth had collided with power. He thought about Porn, about the letter that would never be finished, about 15 years of carrying guilt that had never entirely belonged to him. "What happens now?" Somkai asked. "Now we walk out of here," Marcus said, shouldering the evidence pack one final time. "Together." And Phoenix Holdings explains to the world why they sent armed soldiers to silence the families of the men they murdered. The operatives were already withdrawing, their radios buzzing with urgent instructions from handlers who finally understood that some stories were too big to bury. Marcus took his first step toward the temple entrance, toward sunlight, toward whatever justice looked like for the sons of Porn Thanakit. The sunlight outside the temple felt different against Marcus's skin, cleaner somehow, like stepping out of a cave he'd been trapped in for 15 years. The Phoenix Holdings operatives melted back into the jungle with the professional efficiency of men who understood when a mission had shifted from containment to damage control. Their radios continued crackling with urgent instructions, but the voices sounded increasingly desperate. Kaman walked beside him, still carrying his father's evidence folder like a sacred text. "Is it really over?" he asked, his voice barely audible above the jungle sounds. "The running is over," Marcus said, watching the last operative disappear between the trees. "But the real work is just beginning." They emerged from the jungle path to find chaos. News vans lined the dirt road leading to the film set, their satellite dishes reaching toward a sky that seemed impossibly blue after the green dimness of the temple. Marcus counted at least 6 international networks, plus crews he didn't recognize. The story had gone global while they'd been underground. Sarah Chen intercepted them before they'd walked 50 yards, her cameraman trailing behind with practiced urgency. She was smaller than Marcus had imagined, but her eyes held the focused intensity of someone who'd spent years fighting for stories that mattered. "Marcus," she called out, slightly breathless from running. "The Phoenix Holdings board is already in emergency session. Their stock price has dropped 30% in the last hour." Marcus felt Somkai tense beside him. The younger brother had been quiet during their walk out of the jungle, processing the reality that his father's death might finally mean something beyond grief and rage. "What about the village?" Somkai asked. Sarah consulted her phone. "Local authorities have suspended all development permits pending investigation. Phoenix Holdings' Thai subsidiary has been frozen by the government." The relief on both brothers' faces was so profound that Marcus had to look away. He'd spent so many years believing that justice was a luxury only available in movies, but watching Porn's sons finally breathe freely made him understand that some fights were worth the cost regardless of outcome. 3 months later, Marcus stood in another jungle clearing, but this one hummed with purposeful activity. The new safety training facility rose from the earth like something organic. Solar panels gleaming between traditional Thai architectural elements, practice rigging suspended from trees that had been carefully preserved during construction. "The first class graduates next week," Kamen said, approaching with a tablet full of schedules and certifications. He'd thrown himself into the work with the focused intensity of someone who'd found his calling. 46 students from 7 countries. Marcus nodded, watching a group of young stunt performers practice fall techniques under Somkai's patient instruction. The younger brother had proven to be a natural teacher, translating the hard-won wisdom of survival into lessons that might prevent future tragedies. "Your father would be proud," Marcus said. "He is proud," Kaman corrected gently. "Some things don't end just because someone dies." The Marcus Mackenzie Foundation had risen from the ashes of Phoenix Holdings' collapse with surprising speed. The company's criminal exposure had opened them to massive civil liability, and their insurance settlements had provided the seed money for something unprecedented, a truly independent organization dedicated to preventing the kind of corners cutting that had killed Porn and his colleagues. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from his lawyer. The Phoenix Holdings executives had accepted plea bargains that would put them away for decades, finally closing a legal chapter that had consumed most of his year. But Marcus felt no satisfaction in their imprisonment, only a quiet exhaustion that came from carrying rage for too long. "Marcus?" Sarah Chen's voice pulled him from his thoughts. She was approaching with her ever-present cameraman, but her expression was gentler than the predatory focus he'd grown accustomed to during the investigation. "The documentary premieres at Sundance next month," she said. "Are you sure you don't want to attend?" Marcus shook his head. "This isn't about me anymore." That was only partially true. The past 3 months had changed him in ways he was still discovering. The guilt, that had defined him for 15 years hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something more useful, a commitment to preventing other people from experiencing what Porn's family had endured. He still carried his father's compass, still felt the weight of the lives that had been lost on his watch. But now that weight felt like responsibility rather than punishment, a reminder of why the work mattered rather than evidence of his own failure. As evening approached and the jungle settled into its nocturnal rhythms, Marcus found himself back at the memorial they'd built for Porn and the other victims. Simple stone markers surrounded by flowering plants that Somkai tended with obsessive care. "Thank you," he said quietly to the gathering darkness, unsure whether he was speaking to the dead or to whatever force had brought him to this place of reckoning. The jungle offered no reply, but Marcus no longer needed one. Some stories ended not with answers, but with the courage to keep asking better questions. Some justice came not through punishment, but through the patient work of building something better from the ruins of what had been destroyed. He turned toward the facility lights, toward the sounds of young voices learning to protect each other, toward whatever tomorrow would demand of the man he was still becoming.